Up next, Authentically Detroit sits down with the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, to discuss his recently released book, Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence. But first, this week's hot takes from WXYZ and Bridge Detroit. Coalition asks feds to investigate claim that Detroit police have a pattern of misconduct. And U.S. Supreme Court affirmative action ban already playing out in Michigan. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Hey, it's Stephen Henderson from WDET and Bridge Detroit. If you love listening to Orlando and Donna's incisive interviews and conversations on the Authentically Detroit podcast, I hope you'll also listen to the podcast I host, Detroit Today from WDET on Detroit's NPR station. Detroit Today is a daily podcast where I talk with community leaders, elected officials, and residents of Detroit, the region, and the state about politics and the values that animate our communities. Listen to Detroit Today every day on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show. Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Cass Corridor at the WDET studios. We are a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Givens-Davidson.
And we back. Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. Donna and I are joined today by Donna's lifelong friend, lawyer, politician, author, and the current Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison. Donna and Keith, how is this blessed day finding each of you?
It's a good day for me.
Yeah.
First of all, the sun is out, it's not raining, and we can breathe the air today. So we got out there on the river walk. That was good. We had family over. Yesterday we had dinner. I cooked, Kevin cooked, and it was so cool because it was this melding of families. David was there with his sister from New York, and of course, little Maverick. Little Maverick was there, and Camille. And then Sarah was there with Luna. Philip is here from LA. And then Kevin's daughter Kiki was there with Kylan. So
at
we
the
had a
new house.
At the new house, that's right. And so we were kind of inside. It was still raining, but Kevin was out on the patio cooking, and we had a really great day. So it's happy celebration. I don't celebrate the 4th of July as such, but we did have a good time.
What is the 4th of July to the Negro? Frederick Douglass asks. You know what I'm saying? Attorney General Keith Ellison is here with us, and I just want to preface this because I know my mama and dad be listening, and they gonna get on me when they hear me call this man Keith. He told me to call him Keith. Keith, how is this blessed day finding you?
Oh, it's fantastic. Here's the thing. It's a family time. It's also a day of reflection, in my view. I agree with Donna. Me and my kids, we pull out, some Frederick Douglass, and we reflect on the moment, right? And, there's a lot of critical things going on now that are pertinent to, what Frederick Douglass has to say about the 4th of July. When you consider the decision, the several decisions that the Supreme Court just made. I'm hoping we can get into some of that stuff.
Oh, we absolutely want to. Before we move on, though, I have to say, Keith, that when I think of the 4th of July, growing up, I always think of being at your house and eating the best barbecue ever in the world. It was the first time I'd ever had barbecue ribs. That's before you moved, right? And so we're in your backyard. Yeah. And the Ellisons had 5 boys, and the Givenses had 4 girls. And we get to their house, and we look at each other and stare at each other really mean for a while. And then we play and play and play and have a good time. So one day we were visiting, and I was running out of the house, and I was like, let's get out of this haunted house. And I ran out, and I don't know if you remember this, but I ended up getting injured in my eye, and I had to have stitches both under and over my eye on the 4th of July.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, Donna has always played hard and fought hard, y'all. Don't. It is earned, honestly.
I know about the fight hard part, but I got to see this play hard part.
And Keith, okay,
Whole life.
when I turned 16, Keith and my cousin gave me a sweet 16.
Oh.
So to say I love Keith is to say, from the heart, everything is from the heart. But Keith has played such a valuable role in my life. And so I'm just really excited. And every time something happens in the news or that he sees it, and I'm cheering him on, just knowing that when I saw that you had the George Floyd case, I said, this is it. It's going to work.
And what I was getting ready to say to that, he's had an impact on your life, but, his impact as Attorney General of the state of Minnesota reverberates to Black folks all around the country and even around the world as him being the prosecuting attorney in that case. Wow. We want to give you your flowers, sir.
Yeah, it's the first first Muslim person ever elected to Congress, right? The first Black person, as I understand it, to represent Minnesota in Congress. The first Black person to also be hold statewide office in Minnesota. And through it all, all kinds of crazy attacks. And,
a Detroiter.
A Detroiter. He's been, and he's been pretty progressive all of his political life. And so I'm speaking for you, and you're right here, Keith. But these are my flowers for you.
Right.
These are my flowers for you. Just hold them while you can, because we do have a lot of questions. So anyway.
All right.
Donna, you're qualified, and it might be technically true that, look, Donna is my family in every way people can be family. You know what I mean? Her sisters are my people, and so proud of all you guys. And bless you guys. And your mom, what a lovely lady. And just, I don't know. It's just great talking to you about this stuff and any stuff.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. It's time for Hot Takes, where we run down some of the week's top headlines in the city of Detroit. For Hot Takes, a coalition asks the feds to investigate claims that Detroit police have a pattern of misconduct. This is Kimberly Craig reporting at WXYZ. At a press conference Thursday, two attorneys with the Coalition for Police Transparency and Accountability criticized the Detroit police, claiming that misconduct in the department is severe and widespread. The quote says, "It is respectfully requested that the Department of Justice officials investigate not only the ongoing police killings, escalating violence, and racial discrimination perpetuated by and within the Detroit Police Department, but also the institutional culture that inspires and sustains such misconduct," said Nancy Parker, attorney with the Detroit Justice Center, who also belongs to the coalition. The Detroit Police Department released the following statement on Thursday afternoon. Quote, "Chief White's administration is committed to transparency and accountability. This community desires safety, constitutional policing, and a community-first approach to law enforcement. This is why the Detroit Police Department is firmly committed to its mission to encourage thoughtful decision-making and a strong sense of community responsibility. To this end, the department recently hired a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional with experience in the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Our goal is to disrupt the pipeline to prison through progressive initiatives such as crisis intervention, ceasefire, procedural justice seminars, and other initiatives. Chief White's efforts in crime reduction were recently recognized at the White House by President Biden and his administration. The Detroit Police Department has expanded its network of crisis intervention teams to a number of precincts to address mental health issues. The teams include crisis intervention trained officers and mental health specialists responding to nonviolent situations in hopes of getting a person suffering a mental health crisis the immediate help they need. The members of the coalition said the answer is not about training police to de-escalate situations or training them to handle someone having a mental health crisis. Parker believes the answer is to divert funding. The quote says, the officers, will do what they always do. What we want is all of these ARPA funds, all of these millions of dollars that's going to DPD that's not keeping us safe, he said. Parker said technology, including Project Greenlight and ShotSpotter, dumps money into DPD and does nothing for the community. Donna, what say you?
Well, this is a police department where we have a Detroit Police Commission, and the Detroit Police Commission is itself not transparent in its oversight. There have been so many cases that have been referred to the Detroit Police Commission that are not investigated. There's a backlog. Their hiring processes are not transparent. And I just feel as though there's a need for a lawsuit or something to really hold people accountable, because I think that this continued complaint doesn't necessarily produce anything. The only time I've seen the police department get held accountable is when Detroit Will Breathe sued the city of Detroit's police department. And then the police department retaliated against two of the people who won those lawsuits by charging them with a crime even after the fact, after judges said that there had been no crime. And so I think that a larger lawsuit, I think the Detroit Justice Center is the entity to do that, although Amanda Alexander is no longer there. Her last day was last week. But she says that she has been replaced by two executive directors. Sometimes it takes two people to do a woman's job, okay? Two people within the organization. And so I think, we should probably get them on here and talk to them about that. And I also want to point out, this is not a brand new article, but in light of the conversations that we're having today, I just wanted to pull out what's happening actually in our community around police violence and see if we could find any parallels between that and what's happening in Minneapolis. Keith, do you see any parallels?
Well, we completed two major investigations within the last month. One was from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, which found that Minneapolis Police Department uses excessive force, including unjustified deadly force, on a routine basis, and that the Minneapolis Police Department discriminates against Black and Native American people in law enforcement activities and violates the rights of people engaged in free and protected speech. And then, of course, there was another one with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, which found almost exactly the same thing. And so, yeah, there are parallels. There, no doubt there are parallels. Before George Floyd, the world was shook by what happened in Malice Green and has not forgotten about that. So, yeah, no doubt, Donna, there are parallels. But if you look at France today, there's serious problems with.
Oh, yeah. I've been following that closely.
Yeah, I mean, Philip, my son, just flew out of France right before the riots happened. And it's interesting because Black Americans say, we go to France and we feel free. There's no racism in France. And then you see the news and it's like, maybe it has more to do with your blue passport than your race. Okay. Because there's definitely some serious issues there as seen through those fires.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no doubt. So we're talking about what really is a international problem. I can tell you that I was recently in Bradford, England, talking about this issue with George Floyd. I went to Lisbon, Portugal, talking about this stuff. And recently members of my staff were in Brazil. So we have a worldwide problem with people in power using excessive force against national minorities and people who have, who are protesting injustice.
And specifically against racial and ethnic minorities, right? And so, racism against Black people is an international pastime. And the colonization, imperialistic policies have been imposed in every continent and have impacted people on every continent show up there. So if you look at Australia, you look at the people who are native to Australia. I don't know what they call themselves anymore, but I know it's not Aborigines. But those people who are native to Australia who call themselves Black actually are dealing with some of the same stuff in New Zealand and just about everywhere. And so I think as we look at it, we have to look at the impact of racism, however race is construed. I was talking to a young lady who is from the Ukraine. And, she's Ukrainian. And so I thought she was white, but she was talking about white people. And I said, well, I'm sorry, what are you? And she says, the white people are the people who speak Russian. I was like, okay, thank you for that distinction. So I think that, it varies, but it's always somehow a racial oppression, even when it was in Europe, right? And so I think it's important for us to contend with that very specifically.
Yeah, and one of the things that Isabel Wilkerson talks about is
Caste.
in her book Caste is how internationally America and Western civilization take notes from each other and borrow from each other in the continual perpetuation of racism. One of the things that really bothers me is this is a part of the blood vein of this nation. Police killing, slave catchers, all of this thing. But I was telling Donna a little bit earlier about the public embarrassment, the public execution of Black people as to send a message, right? This is on par with what has always been a part of this country. It looks different. We see it in cops and not slave catchers or plantation owners, but it is essentially the same thing. George Floyd was killed in a bike lane, like in a very public way. You know what I mean? It's so disheartening, and so I think this quest to divert funding, we have heard it. We've heard many iterations of this: defund the police, fund other things, divert funding. I would really like to see what that looks like in practical.
Yeah, one of my mentees, I'm really proud of this, Alea Harvey Quinn, helped move the city to allocate, I think, about $10 million to a program called Shot Stoppers, which will give money to community organizations that can figure out a way to divert criminals or reduce crime
intervention strategies.
Crime intervention strategies. The challenge is that with Project Greenlight and some of these other initiatives, they don't have to prove they work in order to get the money. They get the money up front. But it's almost like the mayor issued a dare to community groups. If you think you can do better, here's $10 million and you can earn as you go. I'm pretty sure that we'll see some changes, but it's ridiculous to think that in 1 year, some community groups can undo lasting damage caused by so many systems. That said, I'm proud of Alea, and I always want to elevate her because she came to me at 22 years old as a mentee, and I look at her now, and she's like, wow. Anyway.
Come on the show, Alea Harvey Quinn.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to bring her on.
All right, for Hot Takes, U.S. Supreme Court affirmative action ban already playing out in Michigan. So U.S. colleges and universities are banned from using race as a consideration in admissions decisions. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled Thursday, a prohibition Michigan had already placed on its public universities since 2006. The court's 6 conservative justices put an empathetic, if unsurprising, end to decades of affirmative action practices that have helped raise the profile of Black and Hispanic students on American college campuses, particularly at the nation's most elite schools, but has been mired in controversy for much of that time, with critics contending that racial preferences, even when used for good motives, amount to another form of discrimination. Thursday's ruling will likely mean fewer Black and Hispanic students and a higher percentage of white and Asian American students on college campuses, at least at the nation's more selective schools. The ruling was generally hailed by conservatives and denounced by progressives, matching the ideological divide on the country's highest court. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority ruling striking down policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina that relied in part on race. The quote says, "The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race," end quote. Roberts wrote, "Many universities have far too long done just the opposite, and in doing so, they have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice." Roberts' opinion, joined by Justices Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, found that the school's admissions policies lacked sufficiently focused and measurable objectives warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints. But he added, nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise, in an application essay, for example. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, speaking for the court's dissenting liberal justices, said the majority's opinion erects a critical barrier to achieving racial equity in our nation. Sotomayor, the first Hispanic justice on the High Court, has noted in her own life how affirmative action helped open the door to the nation's top schools. Ignoring racial inequality, she said, from the bench Thursday will not make it disappear. Donna, what say you?
Well, I want to hear what the Attorney General has to say on this one. Keith, what say you?
Well, look, our country had affirmative action from 1619 to clearly up to this very moment for some folks. I mean, Jim Crow is not just anti-black; it's affirmative action for white people, right? And we did that. We've not. Let me ask you: are legacies on the table? You know, if you look at the numbers, by some estimates, legacy students are up to 8 times more likely to be accepted into elite schools than other similarly situated students. I mean, is that still good? Yeah, I mean, of course it is, right? So we're not talking about getting rid of racism in college, right? That is not the conversation, right? There's no such thing as reverse racism. It doesn't exist, never has. What it is what it looks like, another attempt to destroy multiracial democracy. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And I would just say that people, that it's time, long past time, to really figure out, where this thing is going. I remember, in 2013, the Shelby County case where they destroyed the Voting Rights Act. Don't forget the Citizens United, which said that giant multinational rich companies can just buy elections. What we're seeing is a minority body, the Supreme Court, essentially dismantle the progress of the 20th century. And if we like the idea of women having rights, of not living in a free-for-all gun-infested nation where nobody is really safe, we really better figure out what we're going to do about this, because this is definitely part of a trend, and it's obviously an absurd decision designed to give privileges to people who already have way too many.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts. One of them is that, the whole issue of having an elite university or elitism is part of white supremacy and part of a racist infrastructure that keeps people in certain places. And so, under affirmative action, there was this mindset that we'll let a few of you all deserving Negroes into our school, but the rest of you all can be left behind. We'll give you a little bit of extra, push. But never in my lifetime has the University of Michigan, which at one point practiced affirmative action, had as many black students as we have in the state of Michigan. It got at highest 8% one year, and then it dropped down to 7%, and now it's down to 4%. But really, we're seeing more rejections than we are acceptances, and we're not looking at root causes of injustice, like the fact that we have schools that operate inside of these little tiny hamlets because of the decision that was made around the school busing in Detroit in the 1970s, where they said you can't prove that racism in Detroit was intentional or segregation was intentional, which is absolutely absurd. Of course you can. All you have to do is look at the FHA rules and all of the other rules that restrictive covenants and housing and other things that ban black people from living in places, and the fact that we couldn't get loans. But at any rate, so you have people who are separated by income and race, and black people living in concentrated poverty. And we keep talking about the past and not the present, and the present forces that keep us there. We don't talk about what happened with the tax foreclosure crisis, where so many black people lost their homes. And in the, and this is a Detroit thing, right? It's not necessarily a national thing, but more black people lost their homes to tax foreclosure, to the government, than to a mortgage company. We had all the predatory lending that happened, and then you had tax foreclosures. And the tax foreclosure law that caused that is still on the books. And it's always been disproportionately implemented with to impact one group. So when I look at the wholeness of it, I say that is a problem, but it's a symptom of a bigger problem. And the symptom of the bigger problem is the young people I'm working with weren't going to go to Harvard or the University of North Carolina anyway. The young people I'm working with are going to a school whose resources were rated by the state of Michigan over years while people enrich themselves at the expense of these kids. They go to schools that were turned into an education achievement authority using some experimental, software. And so I think this case is super important, and it's important that we keep our eyes on it, but it's also important that we don't think that by having affirmative action, we've come close to equality. The people who've benefited most have been white women. We still have large segments of our community that are left behind. The other thought I have, real quickly, is that when you look at school admission practices, they're starting to change a little bit. And so schools are not requiring standardized tests as much as they used to. And it's really the standardized test score that has been the dividing line between Black achievement and white achievement for applicants in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's also grade point averages, but a lot of times it's a standardized test score. If a standardized test is no longer considered in an admissions decision, then the person with a perfect ACT score does not have an advantage over the person who may be a little bit behind. And that's where we see a big difference in race. And so I'm hopeful that those colleges and universities that think they really do care, not those that just file briefs on behalf of affirmative action, but those who say they want diversity, will be more inclusive in their practices for admissions and look beyond just test scores, but look at some of the root causes and the conditions kids come from. A perfect test score is not a greater achievement than graduating from high school with a good GPA is for some students. Some students who are homeless, some students who have parents who are
if you're
incarcerated.
Like Orlando Daly, you don't test well.
Students who just don't test well. Right, exactly. And a lot of that has to do with some other kinds of issues related to how testing is developed. But anyway, I just think if we can put standardized tests, which have always been racist and elitist, aside and say, you know what, let's look at this whole person and how are we going to admit this whole person? You don't need the Supreme Court to give you that right. That is the power of these colleges and universities. What do you think? Do you think that that's a way around it?
I do. Recently we had Aya Waller-Bay on, who is a PhD student looking at college admissions practices around essays and, the admission of Black students and, doing some really amazing and palpable research. Because, right now, what she contends, the state of Michigan sort of identifies and makes up for not having affirmative action on the books through these essays that students write. But she talked about and sort of demystified the whole culture around college admission essays and how students of color, particularly Black students, are encouraged to craft these really traumatic narratives to sort of self-identify themselves in a weird. I think all of it needs to be looked at. The one thing that stands out to me about this case, and I know we got to go to break, Connor. We're coming, Connor. I know we got to go. Is that everybody gets to participate in anti-Black racism?
Yep.
And that part drives me up a wall,
right? Because
for the most part, when we're talking about civil rights and our history and our struggle for civil rights, Black folks have been at the forefront championing civil rights for everybody, but everybody else seems like a willing participant in anti-Black racism, and I'm just not here for it, Donna Givens-Davison. I'm not. You were going to say something.
I just think that I have not seen polls on where Asian Americans stand. You had a Black man who introduced Proposal 6, I think, that ended affirmative action in Michigan. And I'm not saying that there are not a lot of Asians, but Asians are such a diverse group of people. In my class, I teach young people who are from all types of countries from Asia, and their experiences are very different. And so I don't want to assume that this is a widespread perception of Asian people without having more evidence that it is.
Oh, I'm not saying that at all.
No, I know,
Okay.
but a lot of that's the way the news likes to pit us against each other. And so I always like to be more nuanced in how I understand things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, perfect button on that. Listen, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Keep it locked. We are late.
Okay, so I'm looking at this one survey, and they say
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the Neighborhood Tech Hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit. By Detroiters, for Detroiters.
Welcome back to Authentically Detroit, and we are here with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. I want to introduce you to him. Keith has served as Attorney General since Minnesotans first elected him in 2018 as the people's lawyer. Keith's job is to help Minnesotans afford their lives and live with dignity, safety, and respect. His guiding values are generosity, equity, transparency, and inclusion. As Attorney General, Keith has expanded his office's strong tradition of consumer protection. He's fought to lower pharmaceutical drug prices, hold opioid companies accountable for the deadly opioid epidemic, protects tenants from exploitation, protects seniors from scams and abuse, protects student borrowers, hold major corporations accountable for consumer fraud and deception, and much more. Keith kept campaign promises to create a unit in the Attorney General's offices to fight wage theft, work on lowering pharmaceutical drug prices, form a task force on improving women's economic security, and fight for economic fairness for farmers and people in greater Minnesota. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Keith has used the tools of the Attorney General to keep Minnesota families and communities safe, fight pandemic profiteering and illegal evictions, and protect small businesses from unfair competition. Keith is a leader for criminal justice reform and accountability. He is the lead prosecutor of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and led the team that successfully convicted former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on a charge of second-degree murder. Keith's book, Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence, was released in May. Keith, we're super, super excited to have such a credentialed and accomplished man and attorney and friend and family member on the show. Yeah. Donna, go ahead. Take it away.
Oh, listen, Keith, before we get started talking about Derek Chauvin, I really wanted to talk to you about your early career in Minnesota and some of the cases that you fought on behalf of Black people who have been harmed by police officers. Can you share some of your background?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I was a law student, I was organizing folks to stand up against excessive force and police misconduct. I mean, I remember when I was a second-year law student, I was the president of the Black Law Student Association, and 5 friends of ours that were at a birthday party at a local hotel, very quiet. They had kids there. There was a group of kids, white kids, down the hallway having a kegger, and they were rowdy. Somebody called the police. The police showed up, went to the black party, beat everybody up, charged them with disorderly conduct. And me and a few friends of mine started something called the Embassy Suites 5. And we protested, we marched, and we supported them. We showed up at their case. And their cases ended up getting dismissed, by the way. But we brought pressure to do that. And then within weeks, an elderly couple, Lillian Weiss, 68, and Lloyd Smalley, 71, were in a house and were the target of a drug raid. The police used a flashbang grenade to attack their house. It's a distraction device, but it caused a fire and began to generate a lot of smoke, and Lillian Weiss and Lloyd Smalley were killed in that raid, and there were never any drugs found at all. So we expanded our protests, and it's something I've been working on, since I was a kid. I tell you, 10 years after that, I had been practicing law for a while, and I got a call that there was a young man, 15 years old, shot in the back by a Minneapolis police officer. And we sued the police for compensation. There was never any hope that there was going to be a criminal charge, even though he was shot in the back. But anyway, the police got up there and they said, I was afraid of my life. I didn't know what he had in his hand. Maybe he had something. And I remember losing that case. There was a defense verdict, and that young man ended up getting nothing. After we won the Floyd case, he called me and he said, "Look, man, I'm in my mid-40s and I still got a lot of pain. I still have a limp. Is there anything you can do?" And I said, "Sadly, we can't." And me and my colleagues, we dropped over $100,000 in to fight that case and lost everything. And our client didn't get anything. And so I guess I tell you that story because I want you to know that there was a long journey to get to the George Floyd case. Some case, I worked on it on the street level in terms of community organizing, on the legal level in terms of civil. By the way, I won a lot of civil cases too. I won a lot of civil settlements, but that's not the one that sticks in my mind, because Lawrence Miles was shot, not killed, 2 blocks north of where George Floyd was killed. So when I saw that case, the Floyd case, saw that video, I said, I know that area. I did a case 2 blocks from there many years ago. So I'm not new to this stuff. Tried lots of cases, 4 or 5 murders every year for 16 years. And, came to see a lot. And so when the Floyd case happened, I was not a rookie at this, and I had seen quite a lot.
Yeah, not too long ago, was it Jeremiah who made national news with a picture of him and the gun in his back?
Yeah. So what happened is that there was a very tragic situation in the dead of a Minnesota winter. It gets cold here, even colder than Detroit, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
And,
I was there.
Right. You know it. And so Jeremiah is an artist, and he was not really involved necessarily in police misconduct stuff, although he's always had an interest in justice. A lot of his art showed that. He goes to a protest back in about 5 years ago, and he has his hands up. When they were saying "hands up, don't shoot" after the Brown matter, after the Mike Brown killing, and there's a picture of an officer who has a gun shouldered right at Jeremiah, and he's in a picture with his hands up. Yeah. So here's an officer in full riot gear, shouldering a weapon directly at him, and he's got his hands up in the air. You could see the snow flying by, and I saw that. I was in Congress at the time, and I'm like, oh my God, they're threatening to kill my son over nonviolent protest.
Yeah. So
I call him, and he's like, yeah, man, they were out of control. They were scared to death and therefore lethal, right? And certainly that happened, and that shook me up, and it kind of brought me. I said, wow, I always thought that maybe we could do something meaningful about this problem before my kids got to be adults. But here we are.
Yeah. Now, what's he doing now, Jeremiah?
Jeremiah's a Minneapolis City Council member. In fact, after that tragic incident, he went to the sitting city council member and said, hey, well, put it like this. He thought he could do better. He thought he could do better, and he ran against the sitting city council member and defeated him. In an effort to try to bring a greater level of justice for people. And he's on the ballot in November, but he's won 3 elections already.
Yeah.
And so we're looking forward to that. I mean, he got elected on a platform of, equal justice for all.
Yeah.
And he's pursuing that.
So Detroit, I want you to know this. Both Keith and his ex-wife, mother of his 4 children, Kim, are Detroiters. Detroit is in Minnesota making things happen. I believe Kim is on the school board. Is she still on the school board?
That's right. Kim's on the school board. But also, Tanya Allen is the head of one of our big foundations.
McKnight Foundation.
She is.
Yeah. And, we got all kind of Detroiters in Minnesota, man.
I know.
The brother who's the head of the orchestra,
took over.
Paul.
Who was that? Who was that, Keith? Who took over?
I'm having a tough time calling his name, but I put it like this: I was told the head of the St. Paul, public play, the Playhouse, is a Detroiter. Mm-hmm. Let me look it up for you real quick. I'd love to tell you his name.
Well, while you're looking it up, I do have another question. I want to switch to something. It's a little serious and sobering, but I was thinking about it as I was reading your book this morning, trying to prepare for this interview. I was thinking about the Dred Scott case and the statement that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, right? And that, sort of resonated with me. And I read the whole case, and it was really sickening to read, right? The whole opinion, rather. But when I think about it right now, I wonder if a black person has any rights with which a police officer is bound to respect. In most instances, it feels like no, because all the police officer has to do is say, I'm scared. And usually that feels like it's enough. Is that true, or is that an overstatement?
Well, I certainly see how you could feel that it's true. One of the things that we were able to do in the Floyd matter is make George Floyd's right to be treated with equality under the law and vindicate his right to not be illegally and unreasonably searched and seized and killed. We were able to vindicate his rights in that instance. But the reason that it probably was something that gathered a lot of national and international attention is because it feels like a rare event. So the words are on the page, right? According to the words written on the page, all people have rights. But when you look at the pragmatic application, it casts that claim in doubt. Did Breonna Taylor have any meaningful rights? The Attorney General in Kentucky didn't even put charges in front of the grand jury for the grand jury to consider, right? Mm-hmm. It didn't even play it straight. Didn't even present the grand jury with the facts and the law that they could use to indict those officers who killed Breonna Taylor. Well, Mike Brown, the grand jury was misinformed, was literally instructed erroneously on the law in that case. Well, what about the case of Michael Laquan McDonald? His case was the person who killed him was ultimately convicted, but it took over 4.5 years for that case to be brought to justice. Justice delayed being justice denied. And then what about, the matter of Eric Garner in New York? I talked to his mom, a wonderful, beautiful woman named Gwendolyn Carr, and she said to us, my son never even got his day in court. Right. Never even got his day. They choked him out on tape with an illegal chokehold, which the department says you cannot use. And the officer who did it never faced a jury.
We had a young lady who was put in a chokehold in Detroit. There's photographic evidence of this chokehold. And the police department said, no, they just slipped and fell, so it looked like it's a chokehold. But he was doing a proper maneuver or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you about the George Floyd case. I think or the Derek Chauvin case, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
George Floyd was not on trial. Derek Chauvin was. Traditionally, and I think that this is a perception that a lot of us have, that, police departments work very closely with prosecutors and attorney generals. And, they seem to be, on the same team, especially when it comes to prosecuting or not prosecuting cases that involve mistreatment or the killing of Black people. What did it take for you to come to the decision to bring charges from the state of Minnesota to Derek Chauvin and walk us through what that looked like? Did you get pushback? How was that?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because if you just look at it from a strict legal point of view, it's not at all difficult. It was not difficult for us to find the facts, evaluate the proper legal requirements, the statutes that apply, the criminal statutes that apply, and then put a case in front of a jury. The difficult part was not the legal part. The difficult part was the public perception part, was the fact that the first piece of information that came out around George Floyd was from the Minneapolis Police Department, which said that he was an inebriated man who died of a medical emergency. No mention of excessive force. Then the next thing that happened was there was a complaint drafted by some members of the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which was the strangest complaint I've ever seen, because a prosecutor is supposed to list out the facts and the charges to convict somebody of a crime. This sounded like they were trying to acquit the police of anything. So they put all this stuff in there about how big he was. They put this stuff in there about how he had fentanyl in his system. They put all this stuff in there about how he was resisting arrest, when the truth is he was cooperating all along and only kind of said, look, I have claustrophobia, and I'll sit anywhere. You can keep the cuffs on me, but I can't get in that tiny space because I have claustrophobia, I have anxiety. He still got into that car, by the way. But that's the only time he kind of held up. He was Mr. Sir, Mr. Officer all along. I mean, and then, the medical examiner makes the public statement that, well, if George Floyd was found in his basement with this level of fentanyl, we'd say it was a overdose, which shocked me, because I'm like, well, he certainly was not found in his basement. I guess if you can imagine and make up facts that aren't there, you can imagine and make up any facts, right? Mm-hmm. If his body wasn't pushed into the concrete, if his neck wasn't pressed down, well, then maybe he wouldn't be killed by asphyxia. Well, but he was, though, right? So the thing is that there were a number of steps along the way where people in the system, and it looked to me, were trying to avoid accountability for Derek Chauvin.
Well, I mean, isn't that the norm, though? I mean, police departments, police culture. We keep talking about bad apples, and it's like, what police department does not have a culture where people will, protect each other at the expense of the public they're supposed to protect and serve? Where there's a culture, in your book, you write really, it was really upsetting for me to read about some of the other officers. I don't have the names, but there's one who's biracial who wanted to do good, and yet he joined this police department. Talk about him for a minute.
Yeah, his name is J. Alexander King, and he was mixed race, but he identified as black. He had joined the Minneapolis Police Department in order to, improve relationships between the department and people, recognizing that they were poor. He was within a year of being a police officer, but here's the thing. If it were not for J. Alexander King, it's doubtful that George Floyd would be dead, because not only did Derek Chauvin press his neck into the concrete, J. Alexander King pressed his chest and torso into the concrete, which made it very difficult for him to gather enough air in his lungs to oxygenate his lungs to breathe. And so what we would argue from a strictly medical point of view, it wasn't just the knee on the neck, it was the compression of the back and the chest into the immovable asphalt ground, that worked together. And then the guy who was holding his legs. So, he went in there to do one kind of a mission, and then ended up being in the most horrendous police brutality case that Minneapolis has seen. And so your point is, it's not necessarily even the person; it's the culture that they enter into, which sort of creates sort of a new set of values, set of behaviors. Certainly, I can't deny that the culture issue is very serious. What I will say is that the complicated, here's another complication. You have people in the Minneapolis Police Department who've never pulled out their gun, who've never been accused of excessive force, who wrote public letters denouncing what Derek Chauvin did, and they're not a small number. They're dozens and dozens of them.
Yeah, but does that happen in every
problem? The problem with most police departments is not that every single soul in there is bad. It's just that you have a leadership that will reward the most aggressive,
right,
most people. And if you are actually an officer who's trying to make change for the better, those officers find themselves sometimes getting to be the target of on-the-job discipline.
Yeah, that happened to a police officer in Detroit who reported having something. Was it Detroit? Right. And he got in trouble himself, and so he filed a lawsuit, and he recently won that lawsuit. I don't remember the exact facts of the case. And so without looking at the individuals, I hear you, but I'm wondering, even of those individuals, had some of those good people who wrote letters been there, would they have felt empowered to stop what was happening? Or would they fear?
That's a fair question. I mean, we can't know, but here's what we can know. We can know that if let's just say one of those three officers, J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, Tutow, let's say one of them would have said something. If George Floyd would have survived, they go back to the station, and Derek Chauvin says, that dude there didn't have my back. Now that officer has to worry, okay, now they have to worry. I mean, now they have to worry about their safety. They have to worry about their promotion. They have to worry about whether they're going to see. If you're within a year, you're probationary. Will you get to keep your job? I'll give you an example of a person who this really happened to in a very sad way. A woman, black police officer. Her name is Carrie L. Horn. Carrie L. Horn. She was a black police officer, female police officer. She was in the city of Buffalo, New York. And she and her colleague went into a house, arrested some suspects. She walked hers out, regular old cop type thing to do. And yet she noticed her colleague did not come out with her. So she goes back in there to check on what's going on. And this guy is beating a confined suspect. She says, hey, you can't do that, and sort of intervenes to stop it. Then her colleague punches her.
Wow.
And she defends herself. Now, she goes back to the department thinking, you're really going to get in trouble now because you were abusing a confined suspect. You hit me. You've violated all these departmental rules, and you're going to get it. She's the one who gets in trouble. She's the one who loses her pension. She had to fight for 15 years to regain her pension. And in the meantime, her colleague who beat a confined suspect is charged with a completely separate case where he is abusing 3 African-American children in custody, gets charged with a federal civil rights case, and ends up getting something like 6 months in jail for that.
That's 6 months. Seems fair.
Well, I mean, so my point is, but that's the system, right?
But here's my thing. Every time that happens, we talk about, diversity training or unconscious bias, which I think is a bunch of BS. Now, it's not that I have negative feelings. I'm unconscious of my hate. Yeah. Okay, I don't know that I hate you.
Train them out of hate.
It's just one of those things. It just comes up. But anyway, which is ridiculous because we have there's language around it, right? You can listen to how police officers speak to each other about people. This isn't an unconscious bias. This is calling people all kinds of names that are dehumanizing. It is a culture of lacking humanity. And so my question is, how do we really break the wheel? I mean, if every state had you and every state was organized in such a way where the attorney general actually could get involved in a local process, which our state is not, maybe we could see some progress. But in general, it seems as though we need to. So Orlando and I have been talking for the last few years about defund the police and the fact that maybe that is not the right terminology. Maybe what we're talking about is redefine public safety or rethink public safety or something that doesn't talk about taking away resources but reassigning them to something else. Do you have ideas about what we could do to break this logjam? Because it just feels almost hopeless as you read story after story.
Well, what I must say is that we cannot get hopeless. The burden of leadership is that you are always trying to find the way forward, right? And, we do need, public safety. I mean, there's no question that, here in Minnesota, Detroit, private citizens who do not have the color of law, rape each other, shoot each other, kill each other. We need public safety. The problem is that we have assumed that the only way to get public safety is by relying 100% on police.
Yeah, but white people do it too. So, in white communities, people rape, kill, abuse children, everything.
I'm not speaking racially.
No, I'm
speaking in general.
Right.
Okay.
But
no, so I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. Go on. No, I'm sorry. Go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that there is a need for public safety of all colors in every city.
Right.
And yet at the same time, we, I think, make the mistake of saying that the exclusive, providers of that are police. And I think that I think what we should do is we should ask ourselves, how do we make people safe? I'm convinced that we will need, on occasion, armed agents of the state to deal with certain problems. But a lot of times, that's not what we need. Take George Floyd, for example. He was accused of passing a bad 20. Did we need 4 armed agents of the state to come in there, guns ablazing, which they were, sticking their guns in his face, calling them all kinds of MFers, escalating the tension? But when we're talking about a small property allegation, by the way, George Floyd never even knew that the 20 was bad, right? But like, what if we had a group that came in, some unit that came out and said, look, this is essentially a property matter. We're going to investigate it. We do need to find out where the counterfeit 20 came from. Ask George Floyd some questions. He was more than happy to answer them. He answered every question that was ever put to him. George Floyd, his case alone could have been dealt with differently. So many problems. A lot of traffic cases, they don't even require a stop. You've gotten the license plate on camera. Use that to trace that car and send the ticket to that house.
Right. So I guess my question is intent, right? Now you say public safety, and that's what everybody says it is. But actually, I think a lot of times police officers act with a different motives when they're dealing with black folks, right? I think there's a containment motive. I think it's keeping people in their place a lot of times. Sometimes people are just acting out aggression. It's interesting because in many cities, I can't speak. I actually tried to Google this today. It seems like the police showed up pretty quickly and in large numbers for this relatively small misdemeanor crime or whatever. But if a person was at risk of harm inside of a black neighborhood, a lot of times you can't get the police officers to come for hours. And so if public safety was the issue.
What was the name of the song that Flavor Flav put out there?
Oh, and Public Enemy?
Yeah. 911 is.
Oh gosh, I can't.
I don't know.
To the Googles.
I think the name of the song was 911 is a joke.
Okay,
yeah.
Exactly. And so, but it's not for a 19-year-old who thinks that they have observed a crime. And I guess that's my point. Is that I think we have to really investigate whether or not public safety is the true objective here. Because
so I would divide it out this way, Donna. I'd say public safety is our true objective here.
Right.
But is public safety what American policing is organized around?
Yes, thank you for rephrasing it.
Right, and I think it's fair to question that, right? Because in the city of Minneapolis, we had this scandal where we had all these rape kits that were never even tested.
Sounds a lot like what happened here in Wayne County.
We had 11,000 rape kits in Detroit that were never tested. And when they went back and read the police notes, a lot of times they said they didn't believe the person was really raped. And it was mostly black and brown women who were impacted by this across the nation. Is that also true in Minnesota?
Well, I don't know what the racial dynamic is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was black and brown women. I will tell you that in a lot of places, there were women of all colors, including white women, who were accused, who said they were raped, had a rape kit which was never tested, and then the rapist is caught, and the property of the woman who was raped is found in the possession of the rapist, and the woman was told she was lying, was browbeaten until she said she was lying, was publicly accused of lying, and then was charged with making a false police report. You follow what I'm saying? That is a nightmare. So you're raped. You say, I was raped. You take the test. You tell the story. They say we think you're lying. And then they end up finding that you were absolutely telling the truth the whole time. And now you have a conviction for making a false police report. That is police misconduct. I am sorry. There is simply no two ways about it. It's not excessive force, but it's misconduct of another kind. And women, all people need to be protected from sexual assault. They need people who want to do it. And so, I think the question is, can we reach a point where people can trust their police department, where they can actually be protected from crime, where the police don't have an alternative agenda to maintain a racial hierarchy?
Exactly.
This is the real challenge that's in front of us. And I can tell you in Minneapolis, we had the head of the police union, a guy named Bob Kroll, way back when I was in Congress, Donna, I'll tell you this. He said in a police-only meeting, only cops were in the meeting, nobody in the meeting but cops, that, the people of Minneapolis are pretty dumb because America's at war with the terrorists, but we just elected one of them. This black police officer, woman named Gwen Gunther, raises her hand and says, "Are you calling Congressman Ellison a terrorist?" And so this whole thing, he denied it, and all this kind of stuff. But the police chief ended up having to apologize to me publicly because of what he did. So if that guy is going around doing policing, right? This is the mentality of the people doing policing. I would say this: it's not entirely bad that you've seen a lot of people who leave policing. It is. For the ones who want to do the job, like Carrie O'Horn, we don't want to lose them. But for the bad ones, like Bob Kroll, good riddance. I think we do. I don't necessarily agree with the people who say defund the police, but I do agree with them when they say refund public health, refund mental health, housing. Why does the richest country in the world have people living in the street in every single city in America? Let's put the money into where it should be so that we can reduce the need for policing, and then let's hire people who are there to do meaningful service, and then let's hold people accountable when they fail to do that. I think that there are some cities that have seen some success. Under Ras Baraka, Newark has made meaningful improvements in policing. That's important. It's not a hopeless situation. We can make meaningful change here, but it's going to have to be sustained efforts, and you're going to have to root out an old, ugly culture with regard to some people.
I want to ask you sort of a personal and reflective question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to hear from you anyway. You've sort of been an anomaly, an outlier within the Democratic Party. Every time you've run for elective office, the type of scrutiny that you have to face around your record, around you being a Muslim, around other progressive ideas that you espouse, it's been met with, a really severe fight. And what I'm also thinking and holding is that Minnesotans want progress. I mean, who succeeded you in Congress in the person of Ilhan Omar, right? But it seems as if even within the ranks of your own party, that there is fear. You talked about it a little bit earlier around someone calling you a terrorist. How do you respond to that, and what motivates you to keep going and chomping at the bit?
Well, I made it real clear that I'm not scared of the head of the Minneapolis Police Union, right? Nothing he does makes me worry. He doesn't keep me up at night. But what does keep me concerned is some 17-year-old Somali kid who might encounter this bully, right? That does worry me, right? How do I keep going? I don't know. I mean, Donna, you and I were raised by tough people, right? I know that your mom expects you to stand up and do the right thing, and my mom expected the same thing. We both have lost our moms recently, and they're speaking in our ears, right? As we move forward in adult life, I don't know. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying, right?
I can honestly say that Keith Ellison has never been afraid of people. Growing up, when people knew nobody ever messed with me. I'm just saying, nobody ever messed with me.
But that's what makes him a national anomaly?
It's what makes you a national anomaly. But I also want to say that part of that, I'm going to give credit to Detroit. Some of that is the Detroit in you in Minneapolis, because you know how we are. We don't necessarily back down from fights. It's our culture.
That's right.
We have a community that was born in kind of protest, and we were certainly raised in that. Our fathers actually went to medical school together at the University of Michigan, dealing with all kinds of racism there. And so, and then, all of the scars that went along with that. But Keith, I have one more question for you about money. And that is how much money people are worried about defunding police. And yet it seems like we've spent more money on policing after George Floyd was killed, after those demands. Right. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, the response was, so what happened about 2 weeks after George Floyd's horrific murder is you had some people who were a little bit beyond teenagers. They were the young adults who wrote "Defund the Police" on this stage, and then asked a bunch of Minneapolis City Council members what their commitment was to meaningful change. And so that mantra got grabbed on, and then the right wing really used it. And the response was that actually more money to police. That has been a national response. That has been
from both parties, including the Democratic Party here in the state of Michigan.
I mean, in the Detroit budget,
it became a dog whistle.
Yeah, it's not. I think it's more. I think it's more than even a dog whistle, though. I think there's almost this thing where police officers, when they feel like they're under attack, have very astute political people who are supporting them and who are able to lobby in their behalf. Even without the phrase "defund the police," there was a lot of protest against policing. And the backlash is, oh, no, everybody loves police. We're not going to criticize police. Of course, most police are good people. You always have to say most police are good people. There's only a few bad apples in order to criticize one police officer who murders.
You have to qualify your criticism.
But you don't have to do that if it's a black person or if there's an Arab person, or you don't even have to do that calling Keith a terrorist just because you don't like his religion. But you have to say that about police officers. They are a protected group inside of our country. You can attack teachers. Now you can say defund schools. You can attack teachers unions and say teachers get paid too much and they aren't doing a good job. But it feels like we have these attitudes that we are, that there's this brainwashing or this socialization of people in our culture to always believe police officers are the good guys. We get it in our schools, little cartoons for kids. From a very young age.
Cops and robbers.
And so we just want to love our
Socialization.
police.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. You know what?
Well, we don't do the Carry-O horns of this world any favors when we do that, by the way.
No, absolutely not.
So for the people who want to do the job, and I will say that there are many, this idea that there is that if you scrutinize the conduct of police officers, you somehow hate all the cops, right? That is bogus, and it makes policing worse because no institution is going to be better off if it doesn't have any scrutiny. I mean, it is important, for journalists to be like, well, hey, that was a good story, that was not a good story. We all need feedback, but what they're saying is don't give us any feedback, only unless it's flattery, And then we can get along. The fact is that we have relegated officers who want to do the job to having to have partners like Derek Chauvin
and bosses who defend Derek Chauvin and let him get away with it, right? Because if you're a good police officer, you deserve a good boss who is ethical, who's going to protect you, and who's going to protect the law so that you can be groomed correctly. I think of Training Day, and Training Day seemed so wild to me when I watched it, but now I look at it and it's like, whoa, maybe that's not wild.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that in New York Police Department, not New York, in L.A. Police Department during the Rampart scandal, that was a realistic portrayal. I don't know if y'all ever heard of the Rampart scandal, but the Rampart scandal in L.A. was they had a criminal gang, and the police were being hired by criminals to do executions, drug deliveries, all kind of crazy stuff, man. And that was the reality. You also had a problem with that in Baltimore, also all over New York. It's not at all a rare event. It's not reported on a lot, though. We can have better policing. We need better policing. But we can't have it unless we can have accountability and scrutiny, because we've got to have a way to prosecute crime, whether the person has a badge or not. And we'll also have to have a way to fire people who violate, the standards that they're trained to uphold.
Yeah.
I mean, Derek Chauvin had 18 prior excessive force complaints.
Right.
And so, like,
and he was punished for one of them, right?
One. And nobody ever pulled him in and said, you know what? You're not. This is not going well for you. This might not be for you. Have you ever thought about drywall?
Right? Because he was out of control.
We need people. We should be trying to get people who want to do service.
Well, I think he wanted to. I think he wanted to assault, though. I think you did. You call him a predator and say that? I think somebody referred to him as a predator because he was looking for prey. This is not the first time. He pulled George Floyd out of a car. They pulled him out, and he did a maneuver that he'd done before. That was not the first time. So
you're right.
And
right.
I think that there's people who get joy out of it. If some people like hurting people, it's we don't like to believe that, but we know it's true. And we have sadists who are protected within the department. Certainly, I'm not saying all police officers are sadists, but I'm going to say that the command either has a high tolerance for sadism or for harming people. I mean, some of the things you hear about are just horrible. But Keith, you're going to be in town on Sunday at your brother's church, right? Church of the New Covenant. There's a book event and signing in partnership with Source Books.
Hey, Miss Janet and Miss Ellison.
Right. It's at 3426 Puritan Avenue, Church of the New Covenant, Pastor Brian Ellison. And so I could talk to you, and I could, for days and days and days, but we have to somehow limit our time here because Orlando's giving me the look.
No one wants to interrupt Attorney General Keith Ellison.
Never.
So we've gone gracefully over our audio engineers. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
We want to thank you, Attorney General Keith Ellison, for joining us here on Authentically Detroit. If you have topics or news articles that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. It is time for shout outs. And so I'll go first and give you guys time to think. I want to shout out, an irreplaceable activist here in the city of Detroit, Malik Shabazz, who is hospitalized right now from a heart attack that he had last week. And so I remember seeing Malik everywhere as I was coming up and always being a powerful voice and champion for so many people here in the city of Detroit who needed an advocate. And so I'm sending well wishes, prayers, and good vibes his way. Donna, you have any shout outs?
I do. I want to shout out Pastor Brian Ellison, Keith's brother.
Yeah.
Who is an outstanding
preacher.
He's
been on the show before.
He has, and he is just so capable, and he just, really speaks about justice and finds ways to relate people's faith beliefs to the justice movement we have, because our faith should not be separate from our lived experiences. And so I really appreciate that in Pastor Brian Ellison. I hope you go by there on July 9th. From 3 to 6 p.m. and you can get a book and we can continue having this conversation with Keith. All right.
Keith, you have any shout outs?
I will shout out my little niece who just graduated from college. She's a proud Detroiter. Tracy, girl, we're proud of you and you keep on doing it.
All right, everybody. We want to thank you so much for listening. Yes, we back. Did you miss us? Thank you for listening this time, and we want you to catch the wave.
All right.